My name is Kirabel, and my life is dedicated to truth. I am a historical conservator, a quiet specialist in the microscopic evidence of time. I spend my days in labs, not studios, gently stripping away the patina of neglect and the damage of cheap repairs to reveal the original, authentic structure underneath. I believe that integrity is found in the details, in the composition of the paint, the weave of the thread, the genuine intention of the creator. Before Julian, I thought all people, like artifacts, possessed a core truth that simply needed careful preservation. I met him at a private viewing in the back room of a prominent auction house. Julian didn't look like a collector or a dealer. He looked like a piece of art himself, impeccably tailored, with an effortless gravity that drew every eye. I was focused on a 17th-century manuscript, analyzing the precise fungal growth on the binding, when he approached. "You're not looking at the provenance or the estimate," he observed, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "You're looking at the decay. You're looking for the story the damage tells." I looked up, momentarily startled by the precision of his reading. "My work is invisible to most. The glamour is in the selling, not the saving. The damage is where the truth resides," I replied simply, clutching my magnifying loupe. "The preservation process is the true act of respect." Julian smiled, and it was a masterpiece of charm, broad, genuine, and disarming. "That is the most profound thing I've heard all year. Everyone else here sees a transaction. You see a soul." "Kirabel," he said, extending a hand that felt oddly cold in mine. "You and I see the world through the same lens." That moment initiated the gilded facade, the idealization phase that was built entirely on a mirror he held up to my deepest self. Julian wasn't interested in my hobbies or my casual opinions. He demanded access to my philosophy. He asked about the ethics of restoration, the moment I decided my life would be dedicated to conserving things over creating them, and the specific insecurities I carried about my profession's perceived obscurity. He absorbed every answer, every quiet fear, and reflected it back as proof of our exceptional connection. He declared that I was a custodian of history, a vestal of veracity, and that my meticulous nature, which others called obsessive, was evidence of my rare genius. "The world is full of cheap reproductions, Kirabel," he'd tell me, his hand resting possessively on my shoulder. "You are the guardian of authenticity. And I, with my platform, am the only one who can bring your light out of the lab and onto the world stage. Together, we are an unbreakable preservation unit." He overwhelmed me with attention, flying me to Europe to consult on private collections, introducing me to clients as his incomparable expert, and flooding my quiet life with a rush of high-stakes exclusive art circles. He made my specialized knowledge feel indispensable, my small corner of the world feel vast. My friend Serafina, an artist who dealt in loud, messy abstraction, was initially cautious. "He seems enormous, Kirabel. Does he leave any room for you?" But I was intoxicated. Julian made me feel like the most valuable, irreplaceable person in the world. He didn't just accept my slow, careful methods. He celebrated them as a sign of my moral superiority. I wasn't just working. I was serving a higher purpose, one that only he truly appreciated. I had given him the blueprint of my soul, and he had promised to build a sanctuary for it. The subtle shift was that the platform he promised felt less like shared ground and more like a pedestal. He needed me to stand on it, shining brightly so that he could point to me. The preservation wasn't for me. It was for his display. But in those golden, overwhelming months, I was too busy basking in the reflected light to notice the thinness of the plating. The slow, insidious contamination began once he felt assured of my emotional reliance. It started, appropriately, with the very thing he'd idealized: authenticity. I was restoring a set of 19th-century photographs for a major collector, a painstaking process of stabilizing the emulsions. It was slow, necessary work. Julian watched me through the microscope in my lab one afternoon, the expensive scent of his cologne incongruous with the chemical air. "You've been on this single image for 4 days, Kirabel," he stated, his tone suddenly devoid of admiration and laced with cool impatience. "It requires patience, Julian. If I rush the stabilization, the image will crack in 10 years, I explained, focusing on the microscopic repair. He sighed, the sound loud in the quiet lab. 10 years. Who cares about 10 years? The buyer cares about the immediate return on investment. You have to remember, my darling, we are in the business of perception, not pedantry." Pedantry. It was the first strike. The word instantly reframed my dedication as a flaw, a hindrance to success. He replaced the label of vestal of veracity with the accusation of obsessed with minor details. "You spend so much time on the invisible," he continued, pacing the small room. "It's wasteful. You're losing sight of the bigger picture. You're letting that old small-minded approach of yours dictate our joint success. You're restoring with the mentality of someone still working for the university, not someone partnered with me." Just like that, the rules changed. The meticulousness he had praised was now a liability. The devaluation campaign was conducted with the same systematic focus he had initially used to study me. He used gaslighting to undermine my expertise and my memory. If a restoration project was delayed due to unforeseen structural decay, he would loudly claim I had misread the initial assessment, insisting with practiced outrage that he had explicitly warned me about the fragility. "I told you that binding was compromised, Kirabel. You're always so focused on the chemistry you miss the structural obviousness. You must be tired. Maybe you should take a break. You're becoming scatterbrained." I started doing what I had seen others do. I kept a log. I began documenting all my findings and his comments with timestamps and photos, driven by a terrifying need to prove to myself that my mind hadn't deteriorated. This log, hidden inside an old volume of restoration notes, was my quiet defense against the onslaught of his psychological warfare. He drove a wedge between me and Serafina, too. Serafina is an artist of chaos. She doesn't understand the refinement of the collector's world, Kirabel. She's dragging you down into her instability. He didn't ban the friendship. He simply made me feel ashamed of it. I found myself canceling dinners, too exhausted from the constant performance to face her clear, unwavering gaze. The core of his attack was always on my integrity. He knew my moral compass pointed toward truth and preservation. He started pressuring me to employ techniques that were faster but less reversible, to use modern glues instead of historical adhesives, to age a repair to match the surrounding patina rather than document the new work transparently. "No one will notice the difference, Kirabel. We're simply making it palatable for the market. You're getting emotional about a piece of paper, my dear. Try to be practical." I felt the familiar debilitating pressure to be agreeable, to nod and smile and allow the contamination, just to restore the peace and win back the glow of his approval. I was trying to rebuild the gilded facade he had created for me, desperate to earn back the title of incomparable expert. But the real Kirabel was crumbling under the weight of his impossible, unethical demands. The catalyst for the rupture was a breathtaking 15th-century Flemish tapestry, a massive piece suffering from structural deterioration and color loss. Julian had secured the sale under the condition that it could be display-ready within 6 weeks. I had assessed the tapestry, and the conclusion was non-negotiable. It required a minimum of 4 months of slow, humid-controlled mending and stabilization before it could even be mounted. Anything less would destroy the fibers. I presented my findings to Julian in the immaculate, minimalist living room of the penthouse he insisted we share. 6 weeks, Kirabel, he commanded, reviewing my detailed report with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "The client has a gala scheduled around this piece. They need the wow factor now." "Julian, this is not about a wow factor. This is about conservation ethics," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. "If we rush the warp thread reconstruction, the entire bottom panel will suffer catastrophic tearing within a year. It must be slow." He put the report down and laughed, a sudden, harsh sound. "Oh, Kirabel. Always the martyr for the thread count. You're being melodramatic. I need you to understand something. I sell the experience, not the history. 6 weeks. You use the quick-set adhesive, you color match the missing sections with temporary dyes. And you provide a falsified, expedited report. It's what everyone does. My entire body went cold. The realization wasn't a shock. It was the chilling final click of a mechanism I had been dreading. This wasn't about the tapestry. It was the ultimate test of my self-betrayal. Would I destroy my own professional integrity to satisfy his ego and preserve the illusion of our relationship? I won't do it, Julian, I said, and the 2 words were the most honest, non-agreeable thing I had said in 18 months. His face didn't contort into rage. It settled into a mask of pure, intellectual disgust. Ah, there it is. The self-sabotage, he said, shaking his head slowly. I give you access to the most valuable pieces in the world. I give you status, a home, a life beyond your grubby little lab. And you throw it all away for some esoteric moral code. You are so determined to be the pure little victim, Kirabel. You're a pushover who pretends to be a preservationist. You're incapable of the necessary ruthlessness required for true success. I was trying to save you from your own weakness, but you prefer the dust and the decay. Pushover. Weakness. The words that had once paralyzed me now functioned as a terrible, clarifying solvent, stripping away the gilded facade he'd constructed. I saw the core truth. He wasn't my protector. He was a counterfeiter trying to coerce me into becoming an accomplice to my own moral ruin. I looked at the tapestry report on the table. I will not destroy authenticity, Julian. Not the tapestries, and certainly not my own. I didn't argue further. I didn't defend myself against the lies. I simply gathered my professional materials. My loop, my titration kits, my hidden log of his manipulations, and walked out of the life he had fabricated, leaving the exquisite empty penthouse behind. I traded the illusion of luxury for the quiet promise of my own, authentic survival. The psychological assault post-departure was immediate and systematic. Julian, the expert in perception, executed the discard as a character assassination. Within 72 hours, my access to all shared contacts was severed. An email, sent by his lawyer and riddled with legal falsehoods, accused me of professional misconduct and intellectual property theft related to my conservation notes. I crawled to Serafina's small, vibrant apartment. Serafina, who dealt in chaos, provided the most grounding stability. She didn't offer advice. She offered silence, strong coffee, and the unquestioning trust that I knew my own truth. The cognitive dissonance was a form of psychological vertigo. He called me his irreplaceable soul. Idealization. He accused me of being a fraudulent thief. Devaluation. I wasn't just recovering from a breakup. I was recovering from a manufactured reality. I began seeing Dr. Alana, a therapist specializing in recovery from emotional trauma. Dr. Alana didn't let me dwell on Julian's cruelty. She focused on my complicity, the years I had spent prioritizing agreeableness. You, Kirabel, are an expert at preserving objects, but you spent a year trying to destroy your internal self for his comfort, Dr. Alana stated calmly. Your dedication to being nice was a form of cowardice, a refusal to set the necessary boundaries that would have triggered his disapproval. Your kindness was a weapon he used, because he knew you valued being liked more than being safe. The lesson was brutal. A commitment to radical self-respect is not nice. It is necessary. It meant being willing to cause discomfort, to accept conflict, and to risk being disliked if it meant protecting my core integrity. The hoovering attempts. Julian tried to hoover me back into his orbit, but his attempts, too, were on brand. I received an antique compass, inscribed with a quote about finding one's way back to the true north. Then, a seemingly innocuous email from a fabricated third party, claiming Julian was in financial trouble and that only my expertise could save him, a plea designed to reactivate my caretaker programming. My defense, learned in Dr. Alana's office, was strategic silence. I blocked all avenues of communication and refused to engage with the narrative he was trying to write for me. The silence was agonizing, but it was my agonizing silence, a sovereign territory where Julian's voice was finally muted. In this newfound space, I began the slow, painful work of self-restoration. I returned to my conservation notes, not to review Julian's manipulations, but to reconnect with the genuine joy of my work. I started a passion project, restoring a collection of humble, broken wooden toys from the Depression era. They were insignificant, commercially worthless, but they carried the profound weight of human history. Working with them, slowly, honestly, without any audience or deadline, was the antidote to Julian's grand, fast-paced illusion. The next year was dedicated to applying a new varnish to my life, one that protected the surface but remained transparent, showing the authentic structure beneath. Establishing non-negotiable boundaries. I made a firm commitment to 3 non-negotiables. I will not accept any commission that requires sacrificing the ethical standards of conservation for speed or aesthetics. I will not allow anyone to dictate my feelings. I will respond to "you're being too emotional" with "I am exactly as emotional as the situation warrants." My dedication to my work requires silence and focus, and that is not up for negotiation. Each time I upheld these, I felt a deep structural strength solidify. My refusal to be agreeable in situations where my integrity was at stake became a new form of power. I successfully sued Julian's firm for the return of my intellectual property, my detailed conservation notes. The process was drawn out and ugly, but I approached it not as a personal fight, but as a professional necessity. I won, and the victory was not about money, but about the legal and moral reclamation of my own truth. My business, focusing now exclusively on ethical, slow preservation for museums and libraries, became smaller but infinitely more stable. I chose clients who valued depth over dazzle, and the work was fulfilling and calm. I reconnected with Serafina, who simply said, "Welcome back," and poured me a glass of wine. Her non-judgmental acceptance was a necessary balm. Then I met Daniel. Daniel was a traditional woodworker who built custom library shelves, furniture designed to last centuries. He was quiet, his hands permanently stained with sawdust and honest effort. When I showed him a particularly challenging restoration I was working on, he didn't offer a dramatic compliment. He knelt down, ran his fingers over the damaged section and said, "You know the history of that piece better than its maker. You can see the decisions they made." He saw the process, not the product. He valued the slow, visible labor. There was no intensity, no mirroring, no grand future faking. There was just quiet, reliable respect. When he complimented my meticulousness, it didn't come with a threat of withdrawal. It came with an offer of assistance, to build a specific tool I needed to help me sand a shelf. One day, I was late for a scheduled meeting with him about a joint project. I called, apologizing profusely, expecting him to be annoyed. "It's fine, Kirabel," he said, his voice calm. "Traffic's a nightmare. I've just been sitting here, watching the grain on this mahogany. I'll see you when you get here. No rush." His patience felt revolutionary. The absence of drama, the simple assumption of good faith, was the definition of genuine partnership. I saw Julian's picture in a magazine once. He was standing next to a poorly restored, heavily airbrushed painting, hosting a massive party for the collector who owned the Flemish tapestry. The tapestry was visible in the background, poorly mounted, its colors gaudy and obviously enhanced. It was a facade, a beautiful high-value lie. I looked down at my own hands, which were gently applying a reversible, documented stabilizer to a fragile historical photograph. The work was humble. It was true. I had been saved by the very principles I upheld professionally. The only things that survive the test of time are the things built with integrity, patience, and a refusal to compromise on the truth. Kirabel, the woman who had been too agreeable to set boundaries, had become a conservator of self, dedicated not just to preserving history, but to preserving the most valuable and authentic artifact of all, her own soul. 5 years. 5 years since I walked out, clutching my loop and my integrity, into the unscripted night. My lab is now my own again. Not a high-tech showroom for Julian's clients, but a small, deliberately humble space near the river, filled with the scent of chemicals, old paper, and the honest metallic smell of preservation tools. Daniel built my main work table, a heavy block of walnut that resists vibrations and feels utterly immovable, a physical metaphor for my own boundaries. We aren't married, Daniel and I, but we are intertwined in the most satisfying low-key way. Our relationship is a study in mutual, observed authenticity. When I'm exhausted, I say so, and he makes soup. When he needs uninterrupted focus for a large milling project, he disappears into his workshop, and I don't check up on him or feel anxious about his absence. The trust is a given like gravity. It's the opposite of the anxious, high-wire performance I once confused with passion. My largest achievement of the last few years wasn't a conservation contract. It was publishing a small, heavily cited manual on ethical preservation practices, something Julian would have deemed hopelessly unmarketable. It is a slow seller, but it is respected. It is mine. The memory of Julian now feels less like a raw wound and more like an archived document, a case study in what happens when a structure is built entirely on ego and illusion. I learned to recognize his type everywhere. The glossy surfaces, the excessive praise, the immediate demand for depth that is quickly followed by contempt for any genuine vulnerability. I think back to Dr. Alana's final advice. The goal isn't to be a hard, armored shell, Kirabel. The goal is to build a high, clearly visible fence, and put a secure gate in it. The fence is your self-respect. The gate is your choice of who earns the right to enter. I am still a conserver of small, quiet things. But now, I am also a ferocious guardian of my own energy. I allow myself to be kind, but that kindness flows from a well of internal sufficiency, not from a terrified need for external approval. I am no longer defined by the light I reflect, but by the light I choose to cast, focused and clear, illuminating the authentic truth of my own quiet, durable life. The restoration is complete, and the result, finally, is whole.